Hello, everyone, and welcome back down here to the Gamer's Den with me, your host, Jordan, your master of lore and storyteller extraordinaire. So, for today's episode of Fixing D20 Modern, we're taking a look at an advanced class that allows you to create that hard as nails, hard bitten detective, that nose to the grindstone kind of investigative reporter. It is the Investigator Advanced Class, and like every other advanced class, it's wonderful on paper. It's absolutely a class that should be in a modern setting. Hell, it works in 1920s, 1940s. It works in the far-flung future. It can even make it work for a post-apocalyptic kind of setting. I mean, hell, Fallout 4 gives us a great example with Nick Valentine and the Valentine Detective Agency. Absolutely a wonderful thing to have that can be incorporated anywhere. But if this class is here today, then you all know what that means by now. It's a class that just doesn't really work all that well. Really, it doesn't make you that much better of an investigator than, say, well, a lot of the other classes. In fact, I'd argue the Arcana Ranger actually originally had some skills that made them better at investigating. Um, so for this class, we're going to be going over today, at least, what it is, what it does, what makes it not work all that great, and then hopefully we'll be retooling it into something that works a little bit better for the follow-up episode on this. So we're going to go ahead and just dive right on into this. To start with, the investigator, the requirements for getting into it, you need a +2 base attack bonus, investigative 6 ranks, listen 6 ranks, sense motive at 6 ranks. So these are the skills required to get into the investigator advanced class, which they make sense. I'm fine with these. Other than retooling listen over to perception later, which, again, we'll do down the line. It gets 1d6 for hit points, action points, same rate, 6 plus 1 half per level, character level rounded down. For skill points, you get 5 plus your intelligence modifier. And your class skills, you get a fairly decent number of them. You get bluff, computer use, disable device, drive, forgery, gather information, intimidation, investigate, knowledge of behavioral sciences, civics, current events, and streetwise. You also get listen, profession, read, write language, research, sense motive, speak language, and spot. For your base attack bonus, you get a solid progression starting off at 0, ending at a 7. Fortitude saves are slow and you get the crappy progression from 0 at the first level and ending at a 3 at 10. Reflex and will saves both have a good progression to them, starting off at 1, ending at a +5. Your defense bonus follows that same track, and your reputation bonus you get a 1 at first level and end at 4 for 10th level. It's not a bad setup there. I don't mind that spread. It's not too bad. And it makes a certain amount of sense to me. But again, every advanced class, they are made up of and defined by their class abilities. And for first level, the investigator gets profile. You make a DC 15 gather information check when talking to a witness to a crime to make a rough mental picture of the suspect. This provides a physical description including distinguishing marks and visible mannerisms, like if they gnawed at their fingernails a bit excessively, or if they had a particular twitch or compulsive habit, fiddling with their hands, or were constantly trying to make sure that they were prim, proper, put together the whole time. Things like that would starkly stand out. But they have to be kind of extreme, generally, for people to pick up on them in the midst of a crime. Success indicates an accurate profile is formed for the one suspect seen by the witness. No money is expended on this particular gather information check, which, that makes sense. The investigator can expand the profile by making a DC 15 investigate check involving the crime scene and any evidence linked to the suspect to develop a profile of the suspect's methodology, how they go about things committing crimes. Think like FBI profilers when they're trying to put together the profile for a serial killer. Are they disorganized? Are they organized? What's their preferred method of killing? Do they keep the target alive for a certain amount of time? Do they have a ritualistic method of going about things? Or even if it's a cat burglar, do they have a signature that they leave behind? A little onyx figurine of a cat, anything like that, some kind of signature mark that's left behind almost compulsively at the scene of the crime as a way of taunting police. This will grant a +2 circumstance bonus on any skill checks made to uncover additional evidence or otherwise locate and capture the suspect, which this all sounds well and good, but it is very much dependent on how much the DM is willing to work with you in order to make this particular mechanic and bonus work. And even then, I mean, you're getting a physical description of the suspect can be useful, but I mean, it is absolutely useful, and a bonus is a bonus, but it's just a +2 bonus. It's not hugely significant. It can be helpful. I mean, being able to make a perception check to track somebody down and getting as much help as possible, that does have a use, but this doesn't quite have the oomph you would want it to, especially for a class ability. But from there, the investigator gets contact, which kicks in at 2nd, 5th, and 8th level. The investigator cultivates associates and informants developed by the GM, with the player weighing in on the non-heroic type of NPC that they want. They will not accompany the investigator, they only render a service or skill check on the investigator's behalf. At 2nd level, you get a low-level contact. 5th level is mid-level, and at 8th level you get a high-level contact, which, makes sense. You're an 11th level character at that point. The investigator can't call on the same contact more than once a week, and compensation may be required depending upon the service rendered. Professional contacts may be owed a favor, while underworld contacts will demand monetary compensation, and experts in particular skills will typically want to be compensated for their time and effort. The wealth check is a DC 10 for low-level contacts, DC 15 for mid, and DC 20 for high-level contacts. And skilled experts is a DC 10 plus the number of ranks they have in the appropriate skill, as you're paying them for the use of their particular skill. And experts, well, as the Joker once said, if you're good at something, never do it for free. Now, contacts, this makes sense. It fits with the investigator. It's flavorful. I like that. But again, this is something that's very much so DM dependent, and it almost feels like something that should be developed over the course of gameplay rather than be something specifically used as a class ability. And if you were to do this as a class ability, I certainly wouldn't want it taking up 3 levels. Maybe have it have in its description, as the investigator levels up, they can get higher and higher, better and better quality contacts put on like a permanent list that they might have. But it should also be something quite a bit more roleplay dependent, depending on who they rub shoulders with. For an example, if you take the Dresden Files, Harry Dresden is a detective. He's also a wizard in Chicago. And over the course of his career, for several books, he ends up developing several contacts. Queen Mab of the Winter Fae. He is in touch with the Knights of the Cross. He's also a wizard of the White Court, which, while he's not on good terms with everybody there, over time he ends up having major detractors, but also a subset that ends up following him pretty hard, and it's usually the younger wizards of the White Court who see that, yeah, he's effective, he's getting things done. And so that enables him to develop some contacts with the wardens, at least the younger wardens, who are the guardians of that order. So that was over the course of several books, or in this case, if we were to be running this as a game, over the course of gameplay. And those contacts, depending on how roleplay goes, how different sessions go, can kind of come and go. So this is one that'll definitely require a bit of revisiting. And then after that, we have our usual spread of bonus feats kicking in at 3rd, 6th, and 9th level. And the investigator gains bonus feats drawn from the following list: advanced firearms proficiency, armor proficiency, light, and also the medium variety of the feat. Brawl, defensive martial arts, dodge, double tap, educated, knockout punch, personal firearms proficiency, and point blank shot. So, definitely something to help round out your combat abilities, and it does kind of put this more in the vein of a hard-bitten detective than an investigative reporter, but then again, especially if you're playing in a 1940s setting, I can see where it'd be useful for an investigative reporter to understand how to use a firearm or keep a lightweight ballistic vest handy for them just in case. We also have non-lethal force, which comes in at 4th level. The investigator becomes adept at using non-lethal force to subdue an opponent. They may deal non-lethal damage with a weapon that normally does lethal damage without taking the -4 penalty to attack, which, fine, fair enough. This is simple enough. It kind of fits because a lot of investigators, especially private eyes, they're not going to be just killing targets and suspects. They're working with police. They don't want to have the police coming down on them, so they want to bring in targets and suspects alive. Fine, fair enough. Not the greatest ability ever, but not a bad one. Maybe one that deserves to be knocked up a couple of levels there, just because it's useful, but it doesn't quite have the punch you'd want a class ability to have, especially at 4th level. And then coming in at 7th level, we have Discern Lie. The investigator can discern whether or not another character is telling the truth by reading facial expressions and interpreting their body language. The investigator must be able to see and hear, but not necessarily understand, the target. With a successful sense motive check opposed by the target's bluff check result, or DC 10, whichever is greater, so if the target rolls a 5, you go with DC 10 as just the base flat line there, which almost seems like a why bother, but you never know. The investigator can tell whether the subject is being deliberately and unknowingly speaking a lie. This ability doesn't reveal the truth, uncover unintentional inaccuracies, or necessarily reveal omissions of information. Now, it makes sense. It's an ability that, again, is flavorful. It feels like something an investigator should have, but it's also one that's heavily dependent on RP, how well the DM has prepared things like evidence and other information, because at the end there, this ability doesn't reveal the truth, uncover unintentional inaccuracies, or necessarily reveal omissions of information. An investigator is all about gathering that information, about finding suspects, and using that information to catch their targets, their suspects, in a lie. So they need to have their notes prepared and ready, and they need to have information there and ready, and that's something that the DM has to work with them on, especially with how these abilities are set up, because then they can detect and find those omissions of information, or at least realize they're telling the truth, but there's something missing here. And that requires not only the character to be keen, but the player really has to be paying attention, or the DM has to indicate, okay, you wouldn't know this, but your character, especially with these skill checks, they understand that there's something missing here. There has to be an indicator given by the DM, which, I'll be honest, a lot of DMs, especially since they're not investigators, and this is more a hobby rather than a profession. We're not amazing. We're not always amazing writers, although hopefully that develops over time. You're not always going to be aware of when to indicate to a player that, hey, your character knows that there is something missing from the puzzle here, that they can go out and continue to investigate. So this one is a good idea, but it needs something a little bit more. And then for 10th level, we have Sixth Sense, which is, I think, where the something a little bit more kind of comes in. The investigator intuitively puts 2 and 2 together when solving mysteries. Whenever the investigator spends an action point to improve the following skill rolls, they can add an additional 1d6 on top of the 1d6 that they already get. This applies to gather information, investigate, listen, research, search, and spot. And that's where this kind of falls flat a little bit. Hooray, you get an extra 1d6. Granted, that means you're adding 2d6 on top of whatever your d20 roll is. And, on average, that's a +6 bonus. That's nothing to sneeze at. At minimum, you're getting a +2. Maximum, you get a +12, which, hey, that's pretty damn solid, actually. But it's a capstone ability for an advanced class. It's not the same thing as a level 20 ability that you'd find in Pathfinder or Dungeons and Dragons, but still, this is almost something again that you'd want back at a lower level. It's not a bad bonus, and I'd almost say you'd want to remove the action point quality from it, but it's lacking. And it's also the kind of ability that would be used to help fill in gaps of information that, say, the 7th level ability wouldn't be able to detect, or at least wouldn't be able to necessarily figure out while discerning lies. It's again, it fits, it makes sense, but mechanically it's not the most sound. And altogether, it comes together to make a class that is heavily dependent on the player picking up on things and the DM being able to indicate things, which can be difficult to do so if you're trying to maintain a mystery. If you say, oh, maybe you should check the bookcase, that's not subtle, that just gives it all away and removes everything from a mystery. But on the other hand, if the players are rolling their search checks and they're not quite hitting it, or they're not thinking to look, if they're not thinking to indicate where they want to look or investigate or take a closer look at something, it's a balancing act, and it can be a very difficult one at times, and that's where this class really struggles and fails, because it's so dependent on the DM and the player, more so than the mechanics and abilities of the character, which ideally you'd want to have some kind of a balance of all three, with the class and the mechanics tipping the scales in the favor of the player, of being able to give them the tools necessary to solving the mystery, of being suited to the task that the class is meant for. And this class, quite frankly, doesn't do it. But I think I've harped on that particular point enough. We're going to go ahead and wrap things up for now. I have to spend a bit of time working on this, putting together better abilities, or retooling some of these abilities into being something much more useful to the player, hopefully to all of you. Did you disagree with me on any particular point? If so, let me know down in the comments below. Or if you just want to say you agree or have your own thoughts and ideas, then still, go on down there, let me know in the comments, hit the like button, certainly is always appreciated. And if you want to find more content, well, good news for you, you lucky so-and-sos, there's going to be a couple of videos popping up over this way. One is something the almighty algorithm has determined you will enjoy. The other is just the most recent thing I've put out here on the channel. And hell, if this hasn't been your first stop, then why not consider going on down there and hitting that subscribe button? You know you want to. You've been enjoying things so far. And certainly, I would appreciate having you as a regular member here and joining in on discussions at the Gamer's Den. But with that said, I've been your host, Jordan, your master of lore and storyteller extraordinaire. Thank you all so very much for your time, and I hope you all have yourselves a good night.